Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, can you see the slide?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, সবাই নোটিস দেখেছে গুগল ক্লাসরুমে অ্যানাউন্সমেন্ট আমাদের লাস্ট উইকে
Yes,
ডিসকাশন
ma'am.
হয়েছিল about the class.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So this is the last topic for mid one. এটার আমি গতকালকে I think পোস্ট করে দিয়েছিলাম স্লাইডগুলা. So we'll have a little discussion about that. এখানেও আমরা demand and supply মডেলটাকে অ্যাপ্লাই করব. Basically, this model helps us understand how consumers and producers gain from trading in a market, from buying and selling in a market, basically from the existence of a market. Because there is a market for a good or service, for any good. For example, cars, mobile phones, let's say chips, laptops, books, any market. How are people like you and me, consumers and producers, how are we benefiting from a market? Why is it beneficial for consumers and producers as well, for their well-being, for a market to exist? So এই যে বেনিফিটটা, এই যে ওয়েলফেয়ারটা, সেটা we're going to measure it in somehow. In reality, we can't do that, but in economics, we will put a number on that welfare. So we know that equilibrium, that quantity demanded equals to quantity supplied at a specific price, that the equilibrium, the market being at equilibrium is the most efficient outcome. And আমরা দেখেছি it's from the point of view of resources, that the resources and goods and services have been allocated in the most efficient way. That's why we want equilibrium. Now we will see from the point of view of consumers and producers that why equilibrium is important. That in fact, equilibrium is the most beneficial for both consumers and producers together. Whenever a market is at equilibrium, it basically gives the highest overall welfare for all consumers and producers together. So সেটা আমরা দেখব. The whole point is to see what will happen if for some reason a price other than the equilibrium price has been charged. It could be due to a government policy such as price control. It could be for other reasons, which basically maybe syndicates এর জন্য হতে পারে. Anything that can basically result us to be in a disequilibrium, and we'll see how that is basically that lowers the welfare or the benefit that producers and consumers can gain. The moment we move away from equilibrium, that actually lowers the welfares of the consumers and producers of a good or service. That's why we want to be at equilibrium. The equilibrium not just is the most efficient outcome in terms of resource allocation, it is also basically gives the highest welfare for producers and consumers of a good or service. So আমরা demand supply modelটা use করে এখানে দেখব that how as a seller by selling a good or service how am I benefiting from that, as a buyer by buying a good or service how am I benefiting from that. So এই যে বেনিফিটটা সেলার্স যে বেনিফিটটা বেসিক্যালি এনজয় করছে সেটাকে আমরা বলে থাকি প্রোডিউসার সারপ্লাস, এন্ড কনজিউমার যে বেনিফিটটাকে এনজয় করে থাকে সেটাকে আমরা বলে থাকি কনজিউমার সারপ্লাস. Is everyone following?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so let's
Yes,
see
ma'am.
what do we actually mean by consumer producer surplus and how mathematically we can actually calculate this. So the first thing we're going to look at is the consumer surplus. So when you go for shopping, let's say you are going to buy something, let's say you go to a mall and let's say you like a Punjabi, and in your brain you must have a price that okay, this is the maximum I will pay for this Punjabi, right? Let's say I will pay maximum 5,000 টাকা for Punjabi. আমাদের সবার ব্রেইনে একটা ম্যাক্সিমাম প্রাইস থাকে না যার উপরে আমরা পে করতে রাজি হব না for a good or service. We all have this price in our head, right? Whenever you go for shopping, or do you
Yes,
just
ma'am.
buy at any price? যা বলবে সেটাতে রাজি হয়ে যাই আমরা, not necessarily. We all have a maximum price in our basically minds whenever we want to purchase a good or service. So in this example, my maximum price to buy this Punjabi is 5,000 taka, which means basically this maximum price is also known as the willingness to pay. I am willing to pay up to 5,000 taka for this Punjabi, no more than that. So if I am offered a price above 5,000 taka for this Punjabi, I will not buy it. If someone says this Punjabi, I will not be sold at less than 6,000 taka, I'm not going to buy this Punjabi. So as a consumer, if the price of a good or service is greater than my willingness to pay or my maximum buying price, I am not going to buy it. And all of us will not have the same willingness to pay. আমাদের সবার maximum buying price কিন্তু same হবে না, which means কারোর জন্য হয়তো maximum buying price 6,000 হবে for the same Punjabi, কারোর জন্য it will be 3,000. For someone else also it may be 5,000. It may be different for different consumers, which means if you basically end up buying it, different people will gain differently from buying that good. But one thing is for sure, if the price is above my willingness to pay, my maximum price, I am not going to buy this. If this Punjabi is 6,000 taka, my maximum buying price is 5,000 taka. I will not buy this Punjabi. But I will buy it if the price is below my willingness to pay, my maximum price. If the price of this Punjabi is, let's say, 3,000 taka, I am going to buy it because it's below the maximum buying price, my maximum buying price. Age difference between the price and the maximum buying price, age 5,000 minus 3,000, age 2,000 taka, that's my consumer surplus. That's my individual consumer surplus. This is how much I am gaining or benefiting from buying this Punjabi. I am not actually getting this money. I mean, actually, this is basically, if I had to put a value on the measurement, basically, if I had to put a value on my welfare, what am I gaining from basically buying this Punjabi? It would be worth 2,000 taka of welfare. এটা কি সবাই বুঝতে পারছে?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. At the same time, what if the price and the willingness to pay or the maximum price is the same? Let's say my willingness to pay is 5,000, the price is also 5,000. Now it's up to you if you want to buy it or not. But for basically simplicity, we assume that even if the price is equal to my maximum buying price, I'm going to buy it. So we will buy a good or service if the price is below or equal to our maximum buying price. অথবা যেটাকে willingness to pay বলে থাকি. We will not buy if the price is above the willingness to pay. So because different consumers may have different maximum buying prices, what means that আমাদের যে consumer surplus, the individual consumer surplus may be different. It may not be the same. For someone whose maximum buying price is, let's say, 6,000 taka, and the price of the Punjabi is 3,000 taka, for him or her, the consumer surplus will be 3,000 taka. For me, it was 2,000 taka, and it may be different. For someone, the maximum buying price may be 2,000 taka. So that person will not buy it because the price is higher than that. So not necessarily আমাদের সবারই individual consumer surplus same হবে. Okay, so এখানে আমরা একটা ছোট example আছে of measuring the individual consumer surplus, and from that going to something known as the total consumer surplus. So you have basically this is a good, let's call it good X. There are 5 consumers in this market, potential consumers. Unless you buy it, unless basically it matches your willingness to pay the price, you're not going to buy it. So these are our consumers in this market: Alicia, Brad, Claudia, Darren, and Edwina. So this is each of their willingness to pay, their maximum buying price. This is the price that they're paying for the good or service. So for example, in case of Alicia, she is willing to pay $59 for this good, and the price she's actually paying, the price of the product, is $30. So will she buy it or will she not buy it? What will she do?
So she will buy it.
She will buy.
She will buy it because her maximum buying price is higher than the price she's actually paying. Age difference stuff, 59 minus 30, which is $29. This is her individual consumer surplus. This is how much she is gaining in terms of welfare or benefit from buying this good. This is not what she's actually receiving. We're just putting a number on her benefit. Similarly, Brad's willingness to pay $45. The price is $30. Obviously, he's going to buy it. Maximum price is higher than price paid. By how much? $15. That's his individual consumer surplus. For Claudia, her maximum buying price is $35. The price she's paying is $30. That means she is gaining $5 worth of consumer surplus. If this was, let's say, 30, she would gain $0 worth of consumer surplus. Is everyone following? Because আমরা বলছি যে willingness to pay আর price same হলেও কিন্তু we will buy the good. এটা কি সবাই বুঝতে পারছে? যেটা 0 হবে যদি 30 হয়ে থাকে দুইটাই?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now Darren's willingness to pay is $25, and suppose the price of the good is $30. what will be his individual consumer surplus?
Ma'am,
Ma'am, it
minus
will
5.
be negative.
So the thing is, আমরা একটু কি বললাম, that we will not buy this if the price is above the willingness to pay. So there is no concept of a negative individual consumer surplus. We are keeping it blank because this person is not going to buy the product. সে তো সেটা এটা কিনবেই না, সো এখানে গেইন করারও কিছু নেই, লুজ করারও আসলে কিছু হচ্ছে না এখানে, nothing is happening to his life, no changes, because the willingness to pay maximum price is less than the price. This person will not buy this good. Similarly, Edwina, her willingness to pay is $10 and the price is $30. Because the willingness to pay maximum buying price is less than the price, this person will not buy the product. So এখানে কোনো consumer surplus এর আসলে কথাই আসবে না. Is everyone following?
Yes, ma'am.
আচ্ছা, so আমরা বলছি in this market there are 5 consumers. Each individual consumer has his or her own consumer surplus from buying this good or service. When we add the individual consumer surplus, we have something known as the total surplus. The total consumer surplus is basically the total benefit that all consumers in this market are gaining from buying the good. If we add individual consumer surpluses, as a result, we get total consumer surplus, which basically is nothing but the total, basically an amount or measurement of how much all consumers are gaining from buying this good in this market. In market যতগুলো consumer আছে who are buying this good or service, in total how much are they benefiting, what is their net gain from buying this good or service. এটা হচ্ছে total consumer surplus, nothing but adding individual consumer surplus. So that's 29 plus 15 minus 5, which is $49. এটা কি সবাই বুঝতে পারছে?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
So this is what we discussed, that the net gain that a buyer achieves from purchase of a good, from buying a good, agent, this number, this difference between the willingness to pay and the price is known as that buyer's individual consumer surplus. And so this is basically how we calculate consumer surplus. This is our willingness to pay minus the price we're actually paying. The difference basically gives us our consumer surplus. And total basically consumer surplus, CSD consumer surplus বুঝাচ্ছি, is the sum of all the individual consumer surpluses in the market for a good or service by all buyers. So আমি যখন consumer surplus wordটা use করি, I actually mean total consumer surplus, and that's the case in books as well. যখন আমরা ইন্ডিভিজুয়াল বায়ার নিয়ে কথা বলি, স্পেসিফিকলি ইন্ডিভিজুয়াল ওয়ার্ডটা ইউজ করি আমরা, ইন্ডিভিজুয়াল কনজিউমার সারপ্লাস। বাট ইফ আই সে কনজিউমার সারপ্লাস, which I will end up doing, আমি টোটালটা ইউজ করব না। দ্যাট when I only say consumer surplus, I actually do mean total consumer surplus in a market. Is everyone following this? You need to keep this in mind. Individual buyer hole আমরা individual termটা actually use করব. It will be very clear that I'm talking about an individual consumer, so individual consumer surplus. But generally, we don't say total consumer surplus. We usually use the term consumer surplus to mean the total consumer surplus. যখন আমি consumer surplus বলছি, আমি কিন্তু পুরো মার্কেট সব কনজিউমারসদেরকে ইনক্লুড করছি এখানে। Remember that. So we'll see what happens in the market. Basically, আগে আমরা শুধু কনজিউমারদের সাইড দেখবো, তারপরে প্রোডিউসারদের, তারপরে একসাথে পুরো একটা মার্কেট নিয়ে আসবো। So what happens if there's a change in the price of a good or service? How does it affect consumers? How does it affect producers? And in total, how does it basically affect everyone in the market? So this is basically because we're looking at the consumer side, we focus on the demand curve, right? Amra jehetu consumer, amra jehetu buyer, we demand for a good or service. So we are basically focusing on the demand side. So that means we have our demand curve here. This is basically the market for train tickets. So you have your price of train tickets on the vertical axis and your quantity of train tickets in the horizontal axis. So currently, basically the price that is being charged for a train ticket, let's say, is 500 taka per ticket. And at 500 taka per ticket, quantity demanded, if we go to the demand curve, we can see is 1 million tickets. Is everyone following?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
ma'am.
Okay. So far, it's our simple demand curve. At a price, we know this is the quantity demanded. This is how much will be bought by consumers. Now, we want to know basically currently what is the total consumer surplus in this market. এখন সেটার জন্য আমাদের কি ম্যাক্সিমাম বাইং প্রাইসের দরকার, willingness to pay. So in order to do that, we go on to our next slide. So this is a lot of consumers, right? 1 million consumers. আমাদের initial exampleটা কি ছিল? Just 5টা consumer. In reality, একটা market, there are a lot more than that. There may be hundreds and thousands and millions of consumers. So if we want to find the total consumer surplus, if I want to calculate the consumer surplus in a market for a good or service, আমি যদি এখন এই 1 million consumers এর individual surplus consumer surplus কে add করা শুরু করি, it's going to be very tedious, very time consuming and very difficult. Imagine আমার এরকম 1 million consumer surplus, individual consumer surplus calculate করে সেটা add করতে হচ্ছে. Do you think this is a smart idea to do that?
No, ma'am.
No. So what is a better idea? We use our demand supply model to do that. Basically, we use geometry to find this. কিভাবে করব? So let's look at this market. So age 1500 টাকা, this is the maximum buying price for any consumer in this market. This is the maximum willingness to pay. Different consumers will have different willingness to pay. Million consumers আছে. Suppose out of those 1 million, the maximum anyone is willing to pay is 1500. Maybe there is one consumer or 10 consumers who are willing to pay 1500 taka for this ticket. There may be someone else who's willing to pay 800 taka, someone else who's willing to pay 300 taka. So this is what? This is the maximum buying price willingness to pay by any consumer in this market. Generally, you will see wherever your demand curve starts from, that is your maximum willingness to pay, maximum buying price, অথবা willingness to pay. যেখান থেকে demand curve actually start হয়, generally. Is everyone following?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes,
Now, currently the price in the market is 500 taka per ticket. Now we want to know what is the total consumer surplus in this market. How much are all consumers gaining by buying tickets? Those consumers who are actually buying tickets. In order to do that, all we have to do is find the area of this triangle. So basically, consumer surplus is the area below the demand curve. So consumer surplus is the area below the demand curve and above the price. So our price is at 500. So 500, this is the quantity demanded, and this is our demand curve. So this area below the demand curve and above the price, this is basically the total consumer surplus in this market. এটা কিন্তু আমাদের প্রতিটা ইন্ডিভিজুয়ালি কনজিউমার সারপ্লাস অ্যাড করেই বের হয়েছে। আমি যদি ইন্ডিভিজুয়াল কনজিউমার সারপ্লাস করতাম তখন কি হতো, এই যে 1% basically consumer surplus would probably be this. So let's say, forget this is 1 billion, let's say এখানে 1 consumer. So এই এতটুকু এরিয়াটা, this area, this rectangular area would be the first consumer surplus, যার এটা হচ্ছে 500 টাকা হচ্ছে maximum buying price. Maybe someone else has a slightly lower maximum buying price, let's say 1400. So সে 1400 টাকা হলে একটা টিকিট কিনতে রাজি হবে। তো তার জন্য তার কনজিউমার সারপ্লাস হবে এই যে ছোট এরিয়াটা, between the area between 1 and 2 and between 1500 and whatever the maximum whatever the price is, which is 500, this much area. So এইভাবে কিন্তু এই 1 million consumers এর এই ইন্ডিভিজুয়াল কনজিউমার সারপ্লাস কিন্তু ক্যালকুলেট করে অ্যাড করলে আমরা এই এরিয়াটাই আবার পাবো। So rather than doing this, we can make our lives easier and we can just find the area of this triangle. Is everyone following?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So this is the area below the demand curve and above the price. This is a triangle. Triangle area কিভাবে বের করি? Triangle area মনে আছে কারো? সবাই ভুলে গেছে? ইংলিশে বলো।
Ma'am, half into base into height.
Half into Base
into height.
Into height. Okay. So which one is the base? The base is the quantity. So half into the quantity into height is this, the willingness to pay minus the price, which is the consumer surplus J calculation, which is the willingness to pay minus the price. So for this market at 500 taka per ticket, what is the total consumer surplus? Half into 1 million, because this is basically the base, this much is the base, into the height. Height is what, 1500 minus 500. Is everyone following?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. The calculation is already there. Amader current price or the old price is 500 taka. Quantity demanded at this price is 1 million tickets. What is the maximum buying price? 1500 taka. So we want to see what is the consumer surplus. So we need to find the area of this triangle. At 500 taka per ticket, consumer surplus is just triangular area, half into base into height into quantity, half into quantity into the willingness to pay minus the price, a height. So this should be equal to 500 million taka. That this is the amount of welfare, this is the amount of benefit that consumers are gaining from buying train tickets at this price. From buying train tickets in this market, this is how much they're gaining. They're not actually receiving this, but this is the value of their benefit, of their welfare. এতটুকু সবাই বুঝতে পেরেছে?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Now the question is, what happens if prices actually change in this market? In our example, the price has increased from 500 taka to 650. So price has increased, holding everything else constant. What should happen to quantity demanded? Should it increase or should it decrease? Price has increased. Quantity demanded কি বেড়ে যাবে নাকি কমে যাবে?
ম্যাম কমে যাবে।
কমে যাবে, law of demand, holding everything else constant, because the price has increased from 500 to 650, the quantity demanded will decrease from 1 million tickets. Law of demand is telling me that quantity demanded will decrease. So আমরা দেখছি quantity demanded কি হচ্ছে at 650 টাকা per ticket, it's actually 700,000, so or 0.7 million. Now if I want to know what is the new consumer surplus, কিভাবে বের করবে? New consumer surplus. So consumer surplus টা কি? It is the area below the demand curve above the price. Where is our price? 650. This is our demand curve. Willingness to buy, maximum buying price এতে কোনো চেঞ্জ আসে নাই actually. Only price এ চেঞ্জ আসছে। তাহলে কি? This is now this area, the area below the demand curve above the price. This triangle is our new consumer surplus. Same thing, half into base into height. So half into new quantity into the new difference between the willingness to pay and the new price. So same thing, willingness to pay minus the current price, so which is half into what is the quantity, what is our base, নতুন বেস কি 700,000, রাইট? সো আমরা একই মেজারমেন্ট রাখি, যেহেতু এটা মিলিয়নে দিয়েছি, সো আমরা এখানে 0.7 মিলিয়ন রাখি, because it has to be the same unit, into willingness to pay is 1500 minus new price is 650. সবাই ফলো করতে পারছে?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so let's see, because so এটা তো আমরা আসলে না ক্যালকুলেট করে বলতে পারবো অ্যাজ আ কনজিউমার প্রাইস বেড়ে গেলে কি আমার জন্য বেনিফিশিয়াল হবে নাকি ইট উইল অ্যাকচুয়ালি বি ওয়ার্স ফর মি, উইল আই বি বেটার অফ অর ওয়ার্স অফ ইফ দ্য প্রাইস ইনক্রিজেস? As a consumer, as a buyer, is it something I'll enjoy or is it something I will not like a lot? Will it be good for me or bad for me if the price increases?
ম্যাম ব্যাড ফর মি।
I'm a buyer. So even without calculation, I should already know that whatever welfare or benefit I'm gaining from buying this product, if I'm still buying it, if the price increases, it will make me worse off than before, because our consumer surplus actually কমে যাবে, and that's what we can see here. এই যে নতুন এরিয়াটা, the new consumer surplus, which is half into base into height, so half into quantity demanded, which is 700,000, into অথবা এখানে 0.7 million দেয়া যায়, into the willingness to pay minus the new price, which is 650, should be 297.5 million টাকা. So obviously this is less than before. আগে কত ছিল? 500 million টাকা. এখন it's 297.5 million টাকা. So by how much is the consumer surplus changing? If I want to see the change in something, it would be new minus old always. So new consumer surplus minus old consumer surplus. So that means it's a negative number. So our consumer surplus has decreased by 202.5 million taka. So consumers are actually worse off. আগে ওদের যা সিচুয়েশন ছিল তার থেকে এখন একটা ওয়ার্স সিচুয়েশনে ওরা চলে আসলো because the price has increased. Now এই যে consumer surplusটা ফল করলো সেটা কেন করলো? Obviously price বেড়েছে, but what was the effect? There were two effects that took place. One effect is that because the price has increased, now some consumers are no longer able to buy this train ticket. Who are those consumers? Can you say? যে প্রাইসটা বাড়ার কারণে অনেকে এখন এই টিকেটটাকে কিনতে পারছে না. So they are no longer in this market. They are leaving the market. Who can be those consumers? কোনটার কম? 650, right? Very good. So the consumers whose maximum buying price or willingness to pay was less than 650, but above 500, who could buy it before are no longer able to buy this. এখন current যে market price সেটা হচ্ছে 650. এখন if I was a consumer whose maximum buying price was 600 টাকা, আগে আমি সেটা কিনতে পারতাম because the price was below 600 টাকা. এখন কি হচ্ছে? Price is above 600 টাকা, above my willingness to pay. So I'm no longer buying this. Obviously quantity demand কমেছে, সেটা তো বুঝাই যাচ্ছে যে consumers আমাদের কমে যাচ্ছে মার্কেটে. So that's one way consumer surplus is falling. এই যে total consumer surplus টা fall করলো because some consumers have left the market. They are no longer able to buy the train tickets at the current price because the current price, which is 650 taka, is above their maximum buying price. At the same time, এই প্রাইসটা বাড়ার কারণে আমাদের কি এক্সিস্টিং কনজিউমারদেরকে এফেক্ট করছে? Who are still buying? Who are the ones who are still buying? Whose willingness to pay is either 650 or above 650. So এখন যারা এখনো স্টিল কিনছে ওদেরকেও কি এফেক্ট করছে এটা? The rise in the price? The people who are still buying it? Is it affecting them in any way?
No, ma'am.
No? Okay, suppose your willingness to pay is, let's say, 1,000 taka. Let's say your willingness to pay is 1,000 taka. Okay, before, what was your consumer surplus before the price changed? What was your consumer surplus?
1,000
Minus
500.
500. When the price was 500, let's say your willingness to pay, your maximum buying price is 1,000 taka. It's the same regardless of what the price is. That means when the price was 500 taka, your consumer surplus was 500 taka.
500.
Okay, now the price is 650. Now what is your consumer surplus?
1,000 minus 650. Surplus কমে যাবে. Consumer
Which is
surplus
what?
কমে যাবে.
1,000 minus 650 is
350.
350 টাকা. So কি হলো? আমাকে এফেক্ট করলো না? আমি এক্সিস্টিং কনজিউমার হয়েও তো আমাকে এফেক্ট করলো এটা. Right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so my consumer surplus has decreased, which means not just consumers are leaving this market, who are leaving, whose willingness to pay or maximum buying price is less than 650, they are leaving. So তাদের সাথে তাদের consumer surplus এখন আর নেই. At the same time, existing consumers whose maximum buying price or willingness to pay is 650 or above 650, they're still buying it because according to our rule, we will buy it if the price is below our willingness to pay or equal to our willingness to pay. they're still buying it, but their consumer surplus has decreased. So দুইটা জিনিস হচ্ছে, একটা হচ্ছে consumers are leaving the market, আরেকটা হচ্ছে existing consumers যে তাদের consumer surplus individually আসলে কমে যাচ্ছে। এই যে this person whose willingness to pay is 1000 টাকা, before the price changed, her consumer surplus was 500 taka. After the price changed, her consumer surplus is 350 taka. And that is happening for all consumers who are still buying it. Each consumer's consumer surplus has decreased. Is everyone following?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So, এখানে তো প্রাইস আমাদের বেড়েছে, প্রাইস কমলে কি হতো? Let's say the initial price is 650, now the price is 500. So initially this would be our consumer surplus in the market, 650 taka, and this is our maximum buying price. Now the price has decreased. So what is happening to our consumer surplus? Price jodi kome jay, the area below the demand curve, above the price. Yes, someone was speaking. Someone was speaking. Complete karo. Continue. You were saying something. So consumer surplus এ কি হবে যদি প্রাইস এখন কমে যায়? বাড়বে না কমবে? Consumer surplus is going to increase. Now the new consumer surplus would be the area below the demand curve and above the new price. আগে consumer surplus কি ছিল? Consumer surplus is always the area below the demand curve and above the price. So before it was this area when the price was 650 taka, the area below the demand curve and above the price. Now, if the price decreases and now it's 500 taka, it's going to be the area below the demand curve, obviously, but above this new price, which is 500 taka. This entire area is the new consumer surplus. তাহলে আমাদের প্রাইস কমার কারণে কনজিউমারসরা আসলে এতটুকু সারপ্লাস গেইন করছে মার্কেটে। This is the increase in the consumer surplus. And before we saw when the price increased, this area was the decrease in the consumer surplus. So as a rule of thumb, if nothing else changes in a market, a rise in the price will reduce consumer surplus, a fall in the price will raise or increase consumer surplus. এটা সবাই ফলো করছে?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, think of yourself what happens if price increases, price decreases. I am a buyer, price বাড়লে obviously আমি আরো বেশি বেনিফিট পাবো। প্রাইস কমে গেলে, সরি উল্টা বলছি, প্রাইস কমে গেলে obviously আমি আরো বেশি বেনিফিট পাবো। আর প্রাইস বেড়ে গেলে I know it's going to affect me negatively. It's going to reduce my benefit, my welfare. And we can see it mathematically and in the form of a diagram with our demand supply model. So এটা তো আমরা কনজিউমার সাইড দেখলাম, এখন আমরা প্রোডিউসারের সাইড দেখতে যাচ্ছি। Just like consumers have a maximum buying price, consumers have a minimum selling price. They have a price in their head below which they are not going to sell a good or service. এই প্রাইসের নিচে ওরা কখনোই সেটেল করবে না। If you're a seller, you must have a price in your head, right? যে আমাকে কনজিউমার যাই বলবে আমি নিশ্চয়ই তাতেই রাজি হব না। আমার মাথায় একটা প্রাইস আছে যে যার নিচে আমি কখনোই সেল করতে রাজি হব না এই গুডটা। So that minimum price is the willingness to sell. Now, as a producer, as a seller, when will you sell? When will you not sell? If the price basically that you are basically charging for a good or service, the price that the consumer will pay you, if it is less than your willingness to sell, will you buy it? Sorry, will you sell it? আমার minimum selling price থেকে যদি কম একটা প্রাইস আমাকে অফার করা হয়, let's say এই যে ড্রেস আমরা যে বললাম পাঞ্জাবির এক্সাম্পলটা, so let's say as a seller, as basically a producer, I am willing to sell this Punjabi at the lowest price of 2000 taka. The 2000 এর নিচে হলে আমি এটা সেল করব না। But if someone offers you 1000 taka, will you sell it?
No, ma'am.
No. So if the price you are receiving, if it is less than your willingness to sell, your minimum selling price, you're not going to sell it. But if it is above your willingness to sell, let's say if someone offers you 5000 taka for this Punjabi, obviously we are going to sell this. And by selling it at 5000 taka, our willingness to sell ki, our minimum selling price ki 2000 taka chilo. What am I selling at? 5000 taka. What is my net gain? আমি কতটুকু গেইন করছি? আর বেনিফিটটা কত? 5000 minus 2000, which is 3000 টাকা. So that is my producer surplus. That's how much welfare I am gaining. So as a seller, if the price that I'm being offered, the price that is being paid to me, if it is higher than my minimum selling price, I will sell. If it is equal, again, আমরা indifferent হই সাধারণত, we can sell, we cannot, but for the sake of simplicity, to make our models easier to understand, we will sell even if the price is the same as the willingness to sell or minimum selling price. So if I am willing to sell it at 2000 taka and someone offers me 2000 taka, I will sell it. Age is the difference between the price I'm receiving and the willingness to sell. That's actually the producer's surplus, the individual producer's surplus. এখন অনেকে কিন্তু কনফিউজড হয় about producer surplus and profit. They are not necessarily the same thing. Profit is price per unit minus cost per unit. So the price of a good or service minus the cost of production. Produce করতে যা যা cost আমার খরচ হচ্ছে, resources cost, সেটা, that's economic profit. Whereas producer surplus is the price minus your minimum selling price. Your minimum selling price can be below the cost, can be above the cost, it can be equal to the cost as well. এখানে cost বলতে cost of production বোঝানো হচ্ছে কিন্তু, not all other costs, just the cost of production. So profit হচ্ছে price of a good per unit minus the cost of production per unit. That is economic profit. But producer surplus is the price minus your minimum selling price. A minimum selling price টা cost of production এর চেয়ে বেশি কম অথবা equal হতে পারে. It's up to you as a seller to determine what is your minimum selling price. Don't get confused between the two.
এখানে লস রেখে বিক্রি করছে নাকি সেগুলো আমরা হিসাব করব না, জাস্ট তার কতটুকু সারপ্লাস হচ্ছে এটাই হিসাব করব।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, সে অনেকে আর লসে বিক্রি করে না, অনেক সময় লসে কিন্তু বিক্রি করে, হয়তো সেলের জন্য, হয়তো কাস্টমারসকে অ্যাট্রাক্ট করার জন্য, মেনি রিজনস, টু গেট রিড অফ দ্য এক্সট্রা বেসিক্যালি স্টক, দ্যাট কুড বি রিজনস। সো নট নেসেসারিলি যেখানে প্রফিটই হতে হবে, প্রফিট হতে পারে, প্রডিউসার সারপ্লাস এর প্রফিট সমান হতেও পারে, দ্যাট ইজ অলসো ফাইন, but that's not what we are concerned about. Producer surplus, which is simply the benefit that a producer is earning or gaining from selling a product in a market. মার্কেটটা এক্সিস্ট করার কারণে অ্যাজ আ সেলার আমি যা বেনিফিটটা পাচ্ছি সেটাতে একটা নাম্বার দিচ্ছি আমরা, টু বেসিক্যালি আন্ডারস্ট্যান্ড, টু মেজার ইট, দ্যাট ইজ আওয়ার প্রডিউসার সারপ্লাস। Okay, so এই যে আমরা যে ডিসকাশনটা করলাম, that the net gain that a producer or a seller basically achieves or enjoys from selling a good or service is known as that producer's or that seller's individual producer surplus. তো সেটা আমরা ক্যালকুলেট করে দেখতে পারবো একইভাবে একটু আগে যে আমরা দেখলাম ফর কনজিউমার সাইড, প্রোডিউসারের জন্য সেটা করতে পারবো। এখানে ওরা কস্ট দিয়েছে, কস্ট অ্যাকচুয়ালি ডাজ নট মিন কস্ট অফ প্রোডাকশন, ইট বেসিক্যালি ইনক্লুডস প্রোডিউসার্স কস্ট। It can be cost that is beyond cost of production. সেটা হতে পারে প্রোডিউসারের কিছু সাইকোলজিক্যাল কস্ট হতে পারে, ইটস আপ টু দ্য প্রোডিউসার টু ডিটারমাইন, নট নেসেসারিলি এটা কিন্তু কস্ট অফ প্রোডাকশন বোঝাচ্ছে না, এটা অ্যাকচুয়ালি বোঝাচ্ছে উইলিংনেস টু সেল অর মিনিমাম সেলিং প্রাইস। এখন আমরা দেখতে পারি we have these 5 potential sellers, this is their individual willingness to sell, minimum selling price, and this is the price that actually they are receiving for that good or service. So for example, in case of Andrew's minimum selling price is $5, but the price that Andrew is receiving is $30. So will Andrew sell the good or service? Will Andrew sell it? Our minimum price হচ্ছে $5 কিন্তু সে পাবে $30. Yes, the willingness to sell is less than the price. So for Andrew, his minimum price is below what he is receiving. So the difference, 30 minus $5, $30 minus $5, which is $25, is Andrew's producer surplus. This is how much he's gaining from selling this good in this market. Similarly for Betty, her willingness to sell, minimum selling price is $15 and she's receiving $30 for the good. Obviously, she is going to sell because what she has, the price in her head is much below what she is receiving. So what is she gaining? $15 of producer surplus. Similarly, Carlos এর ক্ষেত্রে কি হচ্ছে, selling price minimum selling price is $25 and the price is $30. So 30 minus 25, $5 is the producer surplus. So একই কারোর জন্য এই গুডটা সেল করে বেশি প্রোডিউসার সারপ্লাস আর্ন করবে, কেউ তার চেয়ে কম করবে। It will ultimately depend on their minimum selling price. So if let's say for Carlos the minimum selling price was $30, then the producer surplus would be 0. 30 minus 30 is 0. When it comes to Donna, her willingness to willing to sell or minimum selling price is $35, but the price is 30. What will be her producer surplus? Her minimum selling price is $35 and the price that she will receive from this sale is $30, the price of the product.
Sale করবে না কারণ
Sale করবে না, very good. So there will be no producer surplus. এখানে কিছু লিখার আমাদের নেই, সেটা নেগেটিভ আমরা লিখবো না, because negative producer surplus বলতে কিছু নাই. It is by definition a benefit, so it cannot be in negative terms. So this remains blank because Donna will not sell the good. It's because the price is below her minimum selling price, so সেটা সেল করবেই না. Even this person Engelbert, the last person, same thing, the minimum selling price or the willingness to sell is higher than the price, so this person will also not sell. So এটা হচ্ছে আমাদের individual producer surplus for each producer. This may be different, maybe multiple producers may gain the same producer surplus, it may also be different. It will ultimately depend on their minimum selling price. Now if we add each of them, 25 plus 15 plus 5, which is $45, that's the total producer surplus. That is the total net gain that all sellers are gaining from selling in this market. So total producer surplus is the sum. Yes,
Donna আর Engelbert-এ একবার বুঝাই দিলে ভালো হতো ম্যাম।
হ্যাঁ, তুমি বলো, you are a seller, তুমি লোয়েস্ট প্রাইস যেটা তুমি সেল করতে রাজি আছো $35, কিন্তু তোমাকে কেউ $30 অফার করছে, তুমি কি এটা সেল করবা?
না।
আমি এখন যে জিনিস সেল করবই না সেটার সাথে কি কোনো প্রোডিউসার সারপ্লাসের কোনো বিষয় আসছে? আমি তো সেলই করছি না সেটা, এখানে কোনো নাম্বার, তাহলে দিস ইজ ব্ল্যাঙ্ক, নেগেটিভ হবে না, বিকজ প্রোডিউসার সারপ্লাস শব্দটা বোঝাচ্ছে একটা বেনিফিট, একটা গেইন, তো সেটা তো নেগেটিভে হবে না, রাইট?
রাইট, ফার্স্ট ম্যাম।
ওকে, সো এটা কখন হবে? যখন আমি অ্যাকচুয়ালি এই অ্যাক্টিভিটিটা করছি, সেল করছি। আমি তো সেল করবই না, তাহলে তো এখানে প্রোডিউসার সারপ্লাসের কোনো কথাই আসছে না। সো নেগেটিভ, পজিটিভ, নাথিং, ইট রিমেইনস ব্ল্যাঙ্ক। So this goes with Donna and Engelbert. Let's think about Engelbert. His willingness to sell or minimum selling price is $45 and the price of the product is probably $30. He is not going to sell it. So there is no question of any producer surplus. He sell korchei na, she market e ashole he is not taking part in this market at all. Is it clear now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So we were talking about total producer surplus. So it's nothing but the addition of individual producer surplus in a market. যতগুলো প্রোডিউসার আছে, সেলার আছে একটা মার্কেটে, সবার ইন্ডিভিজুয়াল প্রোডিউসার সারপ্লাস কে যদি আমরা অ্যাড করি নি, দ্যাট ইজ দ্য টোটাল প্রোডিউসার সারপ্লাস ফর সেলার্স ইন দ্যাট মার্কেট। সো প্রোডিউসার সারপ্লাসটা কিভাবে ক্যালকুলেট করি? নাথিং বাট দ্য প্রাইস মাইনাস দ্য মিনিমাম সেলিং প্রাইস। আগে কি ছিল ফর বায়ার্স? ইট ওয়াজ the willingness to pay maximum buying price minus the price they're paying. And for producers, it's the price that they're receiving minus the minimum selling price, অথবা willingness to sell. Price minus willingness to sell. That's the producer surplus. Again, আবার রিমাইন্ড করে দিচ্ছি, যখন আমি producer surplus বারবার বলছি, I actually mean total producer surplus. Individual seller হয়ে থাকলে, I will use the term individual producer surplus. So whenever we say producer surplus, we actually mean total producer surplus. So now we want to see, একটু আগে দেখেছি কি প্রাইসে চেঞ্জ আসলে কনজিউমারকে এফেক্ট করে। Obviously প্রাইসে চেঞ্জ আসলে সেটা প্রোডিউসারকেও এফেক্ট করতে পারে। তো আমরা দেখব what happens if there's a change in the price, how does it affect our producers or sellers, how does it affect their surplus in a market. So we again have the market for train tickets, and basically you have your price of train tickets on the vertical axis, your quantity of train tickets. Now, because it's the producer side, we're not going to look at the demand curve. We are actually looking at the supply curve. We're looking at the supply side of this market. আমরা কি করছি, we have our supply curve, upward sloping supply curve of train tickets. The current price is 500 taka per ticket. The current price of train tickets is 500 taka per ticket. So we know at 500 taka, if we go to our supply curve, we can see the quantity supplied is 1 million train tickets. আমাদের এখানে you have 1 million train tickets that are being sold. So it could be by, let's say, 50,000 sellers, 100,000 sellers. It could be by 1 million sellers. We don't know. We're not concerned about that. But if, let's say, we have 50,000 sellers, আমরা একটা ছোট একটা নাম্বার নিয়ে নিলাম। Individually কি প্রতিটা সেলারে যদি আমি সারপ্লাস অ্যাড করি, isn't it going to take a lot of time? If you have 50,000 sellers selling these 10 million train tickets, 1 million train tickets, so rather than doing that, আমরা সেই আবার just like consumer surplus, আমরা geometry use করব। Consumer surplus কি ছিল? Area below the demand curve, above the price. But for producer surplus, it's area above the supply curve, above your supply curve, and below the price. So the producer surplus is the area above the supply curve and below the price. This just makes it easier. এখন আমাদের কাজ কি, শুধু এই ট্রায়াঙ্গেলের এরিয়াটা বের করতে হবে। That is our producer surplus. Rather than having to individually add each and every producer's individual producer surplus, we can use geometry and find this area that gives us the total producer surplus in this market. So obviously আমাদের এখন কি দরকার? We have the price, we have the quantity, we need আমাদের এরিয়ার জন্য we need one more basically information because আমাদের height এর দরকার এখানে. So we need the willingness to sell, minimum selling price. So let's see what that is in the market. Okay, so no, that's not the opposite of consumer surplus. Producer surplus is what producers are gaining from selling in the market, and consumer surplus is what consumers are gaining from buying in a market. ni opposite বলাটা একদম ঠিক হবে না আসলে জিনিসটাকে। ওকে, সো স্লাইড দেখা যাচ্ছে, সবাই ক্লিয়ারলি দেখতে পাচ্ছে?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so let's look at an example. এখানে আমরা দেখব what happens if the price of the product increases. How will it affect producers? As a producer, you tell me, if the price of what you are selling increases, will you benefit from it or basically will it harm you? আমি যা সেল করছি, obviously, so we'll see. আমরা এখন এটাকে নাম্বার দিয়ে ম্যাথমেটিক্যালি প্রুফ করব, ইকোনমিক লজিক দিয়ে, that price বেড়ে যাচ্ছে, it's going to benefit me, and we'll see by how much. That's why আমরা পরে দেখব যে কেন আমরা ইকুইলিব্রিয়াম প্রেফার করি। So currently the price basically in the market for train tickets per train ticket is 500 taka, and at 500 taka quantity supplied or quantity sold is 1 million. Now what is the minimum selling price? The lowest price at which any seller would be willing to sell is, let's say, 250 taka. There are many sellers. কারোর জন্য willingness to sell may be 300 taka, for some it may be 500, for some it may be 450. Maybe among all of these sellers, there are some sellers or even a single seller who is willing to sell at a price of 250, and that's the lowest. তার থেকে নিচে কেউ রাজি নেই। তাহলে পুরো মার্কেটে this is the willingness to sell. This is the minimum selling price below which no one will sell. So basically, wherever your supply curve actually starts from, that is the willingness to sell or minimum selling price. Demand curve যেখানে start করে সাধারণত সেটাকে আমরা বলি maximum buying price অথবা willingness to buy. Supply curve যেখান থেকে start করছে, the price from where it is starting, that is basically your willingness to sell. So here is 250 taka. So currently we want to know what is the producer surplus. Just find this area above the supply curve, below the price. Same thing, half into base into height. So half into base is our quantity, which is the quantity sold, into height. Height is this, which is price minus willingness to sell. This is our height. So এটা কি হবে, half into 1 million into the price is 500 minus willingness to sell is 250. So সেটার ক্যালকুলেশন করে কি বের হলো, half into 1 million into 500 minus 250, which is 125 million টাকা. This is the producer surplus in the market for train tickets currently at this price, at 500 taka per ticket. In total, all producers are gaining 125 million taka in terms of producer surplus. This is what they are benefiting. এখন এটা কি সবাই বুঝতে পারছে? Are you able to follow this?
Yes,
Everyone?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now the question is, what will happen if the price changes? Let's say in this market, suppose the price increases. আগে একটা টিকেটের দাম 500 টাকা ছিল, এখন each ticket is being sold for, bottom sold for 1000 টাকা. So now if I want to calculate the producer surplus, by how much basically, how are producers gaining now? Same thing, area above your supply curve and below the price. So price বেড়েছে, তাহলে প্রডিউসারসরা কিভাবে রিঅ্যাক্ট করবে? কোয়ান্টিটি সাপ্লাইড বাড়বে নাকি কমে যাবে? Quantity supplied, price has increased. Quantity supplied will increase. Law of supply. According to the law of supply, holding everything else constant, if the price increases, quantity supplied will also increase. Law of supply. আমরা দেখছি when the price is 1000 taka per ticket, quantity supplied is, if we look at our supply curve, 1.5 million tickets. Quantity supplied will increase. Okay, so now we want to know what is the total producer surplus after this increase in price. So it will be the area above the supply curve, below your price. So this triangle's area, এই পুরো এরিয়াটা ক্যালকুলেট করলে আমরা আমাদের producer surplus পেয়ে যাব. Same way, half into the base, which is now 1.5 million, that's our quantity sold, into our height. Height এখন কি হবে? কে বলতে পারবে? What will be the new height?
1000.
1000? 500 কিভাবে?
750.
কিভাবে বের করব হাইটটা? আগে কি করেছিলাম? প্রাইস মাইনাস উইলিংনেস টু সেল।
250.
1000 minus 250. 1000 is the price. 1000 is the price and 250 is the willingness to sell. Willingness to sell to change হয় নাই. Minimum selling price is still the same. This is our new producer surplus. Let's see how much this is. So half into quantity that is being sold, quantity supplied 1.5 million, into the new price 1000 minus the willingness to sell, which is 250. So this is going to be 562.5 million taka. Obviously, producer surplus has increased. Producers are better off. By how much has it increased? আমাদের এই চেঞ্জটাকে ক্যালকুলেট করতে হবে। So new producer surplus minus the old producer surplus. So 562.5 minus 125. So 437.5 million taka. It's a positive number, which means producer surplus has increased by this much. সবার কিন্তু এই যে মেজারমেন্ট, ইউনিট অফ মেজারমেন্ট গুলো কিন্তু লিখতে হবে যখন এক্সাম দেওয়া হয়, যেটা টাকা না ডলার না কেজি না পাউন্ড না কি, এগুলো কিন্তু লিখতে হবে সবকিছুতেই। So এটা কি, this is 437.5 million taka. This is the worth of the benefit that they are receiving from selling in this market. And because the price has increased, this is how much they have gained actually. So now producers are in a better situation than they were. So total producer surplus টা কেন বেড়েছে? প্রাইস বেড়েছে সেটার কারণে, বাট সেটার ইফেক্টটা কি? Two things are happening. One is there are new producers or sellers who have entered this market. আগে যাদের জন্য এই 500 টাকার প্রাইসটা was too low. This may be for someone whose willingness to sell was above 500, was not selling this product, right? যার willingness to sell হচ্ছে লেটস সে 600 টাকা পার টিকেট, কিন্তু মার্কেটে প্রাইস 500, সে কি সেল করবে এটা?
ও ম্যাম,
নো। কিন্তু এখন প্রাইসটা বাড়ার কারণে কি হচ্ছে, 500 থেকে 1000 হওয়ার কারণে আরো নতুন প্রোডিউসার্স বা সেলার্স মার্কেটে এন্টার করলো না? যাদের willingness to sell অথবা minimum selling price was above 500 but up to 1000, now they have also entered the market, they are also selling the product. Before they couldn't do it because the price was lower than their willingness to sell. আগে কিন্তু তারা সেল করতে পারতো না, সো তখন তাদের প্রোডিউসার সারপ্লাসও ছিল না। এখন ওই সব প্রোডিউসার ওই সব সেলাররাও মার্কেটে এন্টার করেছে, এখন সেল করছে যাদের মিনিমাম সেলিং প্রাইস হচ্ছে 500 এর বেশি বাট আপ টু 1000, সো দে হ্যাভ অলসো এন্টার্ড দিস মার্কেট। তো ওরা এন্টার করছে, ওরা সেল করছে, তাহলে তাদের প্রোডিউসার সারপ্লাসও মার্কেটে আছে। অ্যাট দ্য সেম টাইম এক্সিস্টিং প্রোডিউসারদের কি হচ্ছে, যারা এখনো আগে যারা সেল করতো এখন ওরা সেল করছে, তাদের জন্য কি হচ্ছে, প্রাইস বাড়াতে। What's happening? Existing producers who were selling before and are still selling at the higher price, how is it affecting them? ওদের প্রোডিউসার সারপ্লাস বেড়ে যাচ্ছে। Two things are happening. One, due to the higher price, new producers have entered the market and are selling this ticket. Reason is now the price is high enough for them to actually sell it. The price is now higher than or equal to their minimum selling price. Whereas the existing producers or sellers who are still selling in this market, for them, their individual producer surplus has increased. Think about, let's say a producer, jar willingness to pay hoche, suppose, let's assume this is 300. Let's say the willingness to pay for this consumer, this producer willingness to sell for this producer is 300 টাকা। আগে সে কতটুকু প্রোডিউসার সারপ্লাস আর্ন করতো at 500 টাকা? Before
200.
So 500 minus 300. So this seller basically would enjoy a 200 taka of producer surplus because his willingness to sell was 300 and the price that he was receiving was 500. Now for the same seller, what is his producer surplus after the price has increased?
700.
700. Why? Because now the price is 1000. His willingness to sell or minimum selling price is still 300. Now he is gaining 700 taka worth of producer surplus. So এই প্রাইসটা বাড়াতে কি হচ্ছে, যারা এক্সিস্টিং প্রোডিউসার্স যারা এখনো সেল করছে তাদের ইন্ডিভিজুয়াল প্রোডিউসার সারপ্লাসও বেড়ে যাচ্ছে। At the same time, because the price is high enough for new producers to enter, their producer surplus is also being added in the market. So two things are happening, which is causing the producer surplus to increase. The opposite would happen if the price decreased. তখন কি হতো, কিছু প্রোডিউসার মার্কেট লিভ করে চলে যেত যাদের জন্য নতুন প্রাইসটা it's too low, which is lower than their minimum selling price, and at the same time existing যারা প্রোডিউসার তাদের কি individually producer surplus কমে যাচ্ছে because the price is lower now. The gap between the price and their willingness to sell becomes lower if the price decreases. So এখানে কি হলো, আমাদের producer surplus increase করেছে because price increase করেছে, and that's usually the case. When the price rises, the producer surplus increases. When the price falls, the producer surplus decreases. Opposite টা হতো, if let's say আমাদের price 1000 ছিল এখন হয়ে যাচ্ছে 500, তাহলে কি হলো, আমাদের actually producer surplus এই এতটুকু এরিয়া কমে যাচ্ছে। Previously the example was opposite, that the price has increased, তখন ঠিক এতটুকু এরিয়া বাড়ছে। Is everyone following?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So visually you can see, and even logically it makes sense. If the price increases and you're a seller, obviously whatever you're benefiting is going to go up. That means your producer surplus will basically rise. If the price decreases, the opposite happens. Your producer surplus decreases. As a consumer, the opposite is happening. The price বেড়ে গেলে consumer surplus actually decrease করছে, whereas price কমে গেলে consumer surplus বেড়ে যাচ্ছে। Any questions here so far? Is everyone following?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, because we saw what is happening from basically in one part of the market at a time. আমরা ফার্স্টে দেখেছি buyer side, যে প্রাইসে চেঞ্জ হলে কি হতে পারে, প্রাইস বাড়লে প্রাইস কমলে কনজিউমার সাপ্লাইকে কিভাবে এফেক্ট করবে। এখন আমরা তারপরে দেখেছি সাপ্লায়ার সাইড, the seller side, what happens basically to producer surplus if price increases or decreases. But a market has both a buyer and a seller side, not just one. We basically look at both the demand and supply side together. So we want to know what happens if the price changes, moves away from equilibrium. What happens in a market? How does it affect the consumer and the producer, not just individually, not just the consumers or the producers, but together, overall market, how is it affecting? So for that, we need to basically look at our demand and supply model together. We look at the demand and the supply side together. So this is the basically market for, let's say, any good X. So you have your price and your quantity, you have your demand curve and your supply curve. And wherever they're intersecting, which is here, that's the equilibrium. So that means P is the equilibrium price and T is the equilibrium quantity. So if we have to calculate the consumer surplus and producer surplus, আমাদের সেই যে area বের করে করতে হবে. So consumer surplus is the area below the demand curve and above the price. The price is P, equilibrium price. So এই red area টা আমাদের consumer surplus. Whereas producer surplus would be the area above the supply curve and below the price. The price in the market is our equilibrium price P. This green area would be our producer surplus. Now, if we add the consumer surplus and producer surplus, we have something known as the total surplus. This is the total benefit or welfare in the market. Producer surplus plus consumer surplus. And আমরা দেখবো যখনই মার্কেটে equilibrium থাকবে, that is the equilibrium price is being charged and the equilibrium quantity is being bought and sold, the total surplus will be the highest compared to a disequilibrium. If a price other than the equilibrium price is being charged and therefore a quantity other than the equilibrium quantity is being traded, we will see that once we add the consumer surplus and producer surplus, the total surplus will always be lower than the total surplus when there is equilibrium. This equilibrium total surplus যেটা হবে সেটা always equilibrium total surplus থেকে কম হবে, যেটার কারণে আমরা equilibrium চাই, because overall the society's welfare, overall consumers and producers, all of their welfare together is maximized when there is equilibrium in the market. এটা কি সবাই ফলো করতে পারছে?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So আমরা কিন্তু compare করছি between equilibrium and disequilibrium. So even for example, if আমাদের let's say কোন একটা shift হলো, let's say demand curve বা supply curve, let's say আমাদের demand shifted to here, we are still at equilibrium, which means compared to a disequilibrium, even though the demand curve has shifted because we are at a new equilibrium, total surplus কিন্তু disequilibrium থেকে বেশি হবে. অ্যামাউন্টটা হয়তো চেঞ্জ হচ্ছে, আগের ইকুইলিব্রিয়ামে টোটাল সারপ্লাস একটা অ্যামাউন্ট ছিল, একটা নাম্বার একটা ভ্যালু বের হচ্ছে, এখন হয়তো সেটা ডিফারেন্ট হবে, এখানে বেশি হবে বোঝা যাচ্ছে বিকজ ডিমান্ডটা রাইটে শিফট করেছে। বাট আমরা কম্পেয়ার করছি না বিটুইন টু ইকুইলিব্রিয়ামস, we are comparing between equilibrium and disequilibrium, and equilibrium is always better. So let's look at an example. We'll look at an example of an effect of a price control. আমরা দেখেছি যে গভর্নমেন্ট যদি এক্সটার্নালি প্রাইসকে কন্ট্রোল করে, either through a price floor or a price ceiling. A price floor is a minimum price and a price ceiling is a maximum price. These price controls are set by the government. So if the government controls the price and sets a price that is not the equilibrium price, আমরা দেখেছি যে মার্কেটে inefficiency create হয়. It either creates a shortage or a surplus, and therefore it basically causes a lower exchange, that is less to be bought and sold in the market. আমরা লাস্ট ক্লাসে দেখেছিলাম যে প্রাইস সিলিং হলো একই জিনিস হচ্ছে, প্রাইস ফ্লোর হলো একই জিনিস হচ্ছে, যে ইকুইলিব্রিয়ামে যতটুকু অ্যাকচুয়ালি বট এন্ড সোল্ড হতো তার থেকে কমই কিন্তু বট এন্ড সোল্ড হবে, and ultimately it may result in black market activity and so on. So that's an inefficient outcome, and we'll see যখন প্রাইসটা গভর্নমেন্ট কন্ট্রোল করছে তখন কিন্তু এই যে টোটাল সারপ্লাসটা is much lower than when the price is at equilibrium. So currently, we always start with equilibrium. So currently, we are looking at the market for onions. So you have your price of onions, which is in taka in the vertical axis, and you have your quantity of onions in kgs in the horizontal axis. Do you remember, I think last year, লাস্ট ইয়ার অনেক অনিয়ন্সের দাম অনেক বেড়ে গিয়েছিল না, নিউজে সারাক্ষণ পেঁয়াজের কথা হচ্ছিল।
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so things like this can happen. That price, এই যে onions are recently, I think something similar happened. So এরকম প্রাইস যদি অনেক বেড়ে যায় and কনজিউমারদেরকে হার্ট করছে, গভর্নমেন্ট অ্যাকচুয়ালি ক্যান এন্টার দ্য মার্কেট এন্ড কন্ট্রোল দ্য প্রাইস। এরকম বাজারে গেলে কিন্তু দেখা যায় যে বোর্ডে লেখা থাকে যে প্রাইস কি হবে কিছু আমাদের ডেইলি এসেনশিয়ালস এর। So that's usually set by the government. So in case of, let's say, the onion fiasco, last year it was only about onions, news subject is just onions and onions, the price is too high. So government has to step in. এখানে আমরা দেখছি currently the market is in equilibrium. So আমাদের demand curve আছে, our supply curve, it's intersecting here at this point. That means the equilibrium price is 60 taka per kg and equilibrium quantity is 300 kgs. So quantity demanded and quantity supplied are both 300 kgs at 60 taka per kg. Now again, if I have to calculate the consumer surplus, producer surplus, ekhane amra ki korbo? It's the area, consumer surplus is the area below the demand curve and above the price, which is this blue area. So seta ki hobe? Half into base into height. এখানে কি বলেছিলাম, wherever the demand curve starts from, that is our maximum buying price. So এটাকে ক্যালকুলেট করলে কি হবে? হাফ ইনটু বেস কি হবে? What will be the base? What will be the base? 300. এই যে this is our base. So what is this? This is 0 থেকে 300 যেহেতু it's 300. What is the height?
120 ma'am. 60
60 কেন? It's price, sorry, willingness to pay, which is maximum buying price, which is 120 taka, minus the price, which is 60 taka. So once we calculate this, so this will be, calculate kora ache actually, this will be 9,000 taka. This area is equal to 9,000 taka worth of consumer surplus. So consumers are gaining 9,000 taka in terms of benefit or welfare when this price is being charged 60 taka. Producers der khetre, we'll look at the supply curve. So if we look at the supply curve, it's the area above the supply curve and below the price. So this red area, that's our producer surplus. So ekhane 0 থেকে start হয়েছে. So that means that is the minimum selling price. Maybe someone's willing to sell at 0. It could have been higher. আমাদের 20 তেও স্টার্ট হতে পারতো, তাহলে সাপ্লাই কাপটা তখন 20 থেকে স্টার্ট হতো। So not necessarily যে 0 থেকেই হতে হবে. This example is simplified, যেটার কারণে এটা starting from 0. It could start from 10, 20 and এই যে maximum buying price 120 জায়গায় 100 এ হতে পারতো। এটা ডায়াগ্রাম দেখলেই বুঝে যাবে। So আবারও সেম জিনিস, we need to calculate this area, half into base into height. So half into base কি হবে? এই যে base কি হবে?
300 হবে ম্যাম।
Okay, because actually this is equilibrium, তাহলে quantity demanded, quantity supplied is the same. Market exchange হচ্ছে 300 units. 300 units or 300 kgs of onions are being bought and sold. Into height. Height কি হবে this time?
60.
60. Same way. Price minus the willingness to sell. Minimum selling price. So price is 60 minus minimum selling price is 0. This is also 9,000. So the producers coincidentally সেটা হচ্ছে equal, not necessarily যে always producer surplus আর consumer surplus equal হবে। এখানে যেভাবে আসলে সেট করা হয়েছে ডায়াগ্রামটার কোয়েশ্চেনটাকে coincidentally দুইটা সমান হচ্ছে, not necessarily. So the producer surplus is in this example 9,000 taka. Producers are gaining 9,000 taka worth of welfare by selling onions in this market at 60 taka per kg. এখন আমরা দুইটাকে যদি অ্যাড করি, that is our total surplus, which is 9,000 plus 9,000, 18,000 taka. That's the total surplus. That's that in total that consumers and producers, the society is gaining from trading in this market, from buying and selling in this market at 60 taka per kg. এটা হচ্ছে আমাদের total surplus. এখন আমরা জানতে চাই, if a different price is being set, what happens to the total surplus? is the society gaining or losing? So in this example আমরা দেখব what if the government sets a price ceiling? কারো মনে আছে price ceiling কি? Is it a maximum price or a minimum price? Do you remember?
মিনিমাম প্রাইস
Ceiling. এর চেয়ে বেশি চার্জ করা যাবে না। Ceiling. You cannot go above the ceiling. Maximum or minimum?
Ma'am, maximum.
Maximum. You cannot go above the ceiling. So suppose the government now decides to set a price ceiling at 40 taka per kg. That means this is the maximum price at which legally onions can be sold. Per kg of onion legally can be sold at 40 taka. Not more than that. You can sell it lower than this, but not more than that. এখন আমরা দেখতে চাই যে producer surplus আর consumer surplus এর আসলে কি হচ্ছে, and ultimately we want to see how is it affecting the society, the overall market, consumers and producers together. So now again আমাদের কাজ কি, we're going to let's calculate our producer surplus and consumer surplus. First thing to do, when the price is being controlled and set at 40 taka, let's look at the quantity demanded and quantity supplied. At 40 taka per kg, quantity demanded কি হবে, quantity supplied কি হবে? সবাই দেখতে পাচ্ছে ডায়াগ্রামটা?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So at 40 taka, quantity demanded কি? Look at the demand curve. Look at where it is at 40 taka.
Ma'am, 200.
Demand curve দেখো। আবার দেখো।
Ma'am, 400.
400.
100.
This is the demand curve. So at 40, this is in the demand curve where it's 40 taka. So this is 400 kgs. Okay, what is the quantity supplied at 40 taka per kg? Look at the supply curve.
Ma'am,
200
200. This is our supply curve. This is the supply curve. So that means 40 to supply curve কোথায়? Here. That means quantity supplied is 200 kgs. এখন, is there a shortage or a surplus in this market?
shortage
Ma'am, shortage.
There is a shortage. Quantity demanded is higher than quantity supplied. Obviously, when the price is below equilibrium, it creates a shortage. Price ceiling হলে shortage হবে. So there is a shortage of 200 kgs of onions. People want and are willing to buy 400 kgs, but sellers are willing and able to sell 200 kgs. এখন, can you tell me, market আসলে কতটুকু bought and sold হবে? How much will be traded in the market? 200, 300, 400, how much? Buying and selling. আচ্ছা, কিভাবে? মার্কেটে আছে 200টা, আমি কিভাবে 400টা বেচা কিনা করব? এখানে দাম কেন বাড়ছে? আমাদের গভর্নমেন্ট অলরেডি ক্যাপ করে দিচ্ছে যে 40 টাকার উপরে দাম বাড়াতেই পারবো না আমি। এখানে কিছু চেঞ্জ হচ্ছে না, ডিমান্ড সাপ্লাই সব এখনো কনস্ট্যান্ট। দ্য অনলি থিং দ্যাট has changed is government has set a price control. The question is, আমি তো বলিনি যে পরে কি হবে, আমি বলছি কারেন্টলি এখন কতটুকু bought and sold হচ্ছে। পরে কি হবে সেটা পরের কথা, we are not concerned about that. Right now at 40 taka per kg, how much is being bought and sold? How much is being traded in the market? 200 kgs. মার্কেটে আছেই 200 কেজি, মানুষ চায় 400 কিন্তু আছে 200। আমি কি 400 মানে is it possible to buy and sell? যেটা নেই সেটা আমি কোথা থেকে কিনবো, সেল করব? সো অ্যাকচুয়ালি মার্কেটে কতটুকু ট্রেড হচ্ছে, কতটুকু কোয়ান্টিটি bought and sold হচ্ছে? 200. When it comes to price ceiling, just look at the quantity supplied. সেটাই বলে দিবে মার্কেটে আসলে কতটুকু buying and selling হচ্ছে। So at 200, this is now the quantity that is being traded in the market when the price is 40 taka. এখন আমরা ক্যালকুলেট করতে চাই producer surplus, consumer surplus and total surplus. So producer surplus কি হবে? Area below the price and above the supply curve. So above the supply curve, below the price. So এটা হচ্ছে আমাদের supply curve and this is the price right now. So that means this area, this much area is the new producer surplus. এই এরিয়াটা কি হবে? half into base কত এখন? What is the new base?
200.
How much is it? Okay, 200. This much, this is our base, which is 200 into height. Height কি হবে?
40.
40, which is actually price minus willingness to sell, 40 minus 0. So this should be equal to, producer surplus should be equal to 4,000 taka. This area, this is the amount of benefit that producers are gaining from selling in this market for onions. এটি কি সবাই বুঝতে পারছে producer surplusটা? Area above the supply curve, below the price. এই ট্রায়াঙ্গলটা সবাই ফলো করতে পারছে?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
ওকে, এখন আমরা কনজিউমার সারপ্লাসটা দেখতে চাই। প্রাইস কমেছে, সো অটোমেটিকলি আমরা জানি কিন্তু প্রোডিউসার সারপ্লাস কমে যাবে। উই অলরেডি নো দ্যাট when price falls and producer surplus is going to fall. Did it happen? Producer surplus কত ছিল? 9,000, এখন হচ্ছে কত? 4,000. Obviously producer surplus decrease করেছে। Okay, now let's see what happens to the consumer surplus. Same thing, this time it's area below the demand curve and above the price. So আমাদের to make our life easy, what you should do is যে quantity actually bought and sold হবে, the quantity that will be traded in the market, which is 200. To make your life easy, just draw a dotted line. এখানে যেরকম একটা red dotted line draw করেছি, just draw a line here so that you know যে আসলে কতটুকু এরিয়া আমাদের কারেন্ট সিচুয়েশনকে বোঝাচ্ছে। তো এখন যদি আমি কনজিউমার সারপ্লাস দেখতে চাই কি হবে? The area below the demand curve but above the price. কিন্তু আমাদের অ্যাকচুয়ালি কোয়ান্টিটিটা কতটুকু বট হচ্ছে? This much. So that means it's this area. This is the demand curve. So area below the demand curve. This is the price, which is the above the price. What quantity is being bought and sold? Somewhere here, 200. So this whole blue area, this is the consumer surplus. Is everyone following? The consumer surplus টা কি এখানে? সবাই বুঝতে পারছে?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, আগে কি ছিল? It was a very simple triangle before because we were charging the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity was being traded. Here, that's not the case anymore. Now 200 kgs are being traded because the equilibrium price is no longer being charged. Now this area is the consumer surplus. এখন এটাকে আমরা দুইভাবে ক্যালকুলেট করতে পারি। একটা হচ্ছে basically what we can do is it can be this height plus this height divided by 2. Is everyone following?
Yes,
Yes.
ma'am.
Okay, into this base. That's one way. The other way is you can basically divide it into a triangle and a rectangle. So এতটুকু, so let me just use a different, okay, this is one triangle and this is another rectangle. So you can do that. You can find the area of this triangle and add it to the area of this rectangle. এই triangular rectangle টা মিলিয়ে এতটুকু এরিয়া হচ্ছে, অথবা you can do it as this height, এই যে 120, sorry it's yellow, 120 minus 40 plus this height, which is 80 minus 40, 80 minus 40 divided by 2 into this base, which is 200. You can do this as well. You'll get the same answer. So এখানে আমি triangle আর rectangular area বের করে add করে দেখিয়েছি. So if you do this, আমাদের triangular area টা কি? Half into base into height, which is 1/2 into 200. That's the base. This is the base, which is 200 into the height, which is 120 minus 80. That's the area of the triangle, which is this much. And the area of the rectangle is length into breadth, rectangle to length into breadth. 80 minus 40, which is 40 into 200. So এই দুটাকে add করে এই এরিয়াটা বের করেছি, which is equal to 12,000 taka. That is the consumer surplus after the price has decreased, the price control. So consumers রা কি gain করেছে না lose করেছে in this example? আগে consumer surplus কত ছিল? What was the consumer surplus previously?
9,000.
9,000. Now it is 12,000. So consumers have actually gained because of this price control, because of this price ceiling. because the price has decreased, consumers have gained. Reason কি হচ্ছে? Producers ওদের কি হচ্ছে? They are worse off. Their producer surplus has decreased. Consumer surplus has increased. Actually কি হচ্ছে? কিছুটা producer surplus is being transferred to consumer surplus. Think about it. আগে কি এই পুরো এরিয়াটা producer surplus ছিল না before the price control? This entire area? Is everyone following?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So that means এই যে red area যেটা আমি শেড করছি সেটা আগে producer surplus এ ছিল। এখন কি এটা consumer surplus এ add হয়ে গেল না?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Ma'am, what about this yellow area? You
Yes,
have
we are going to
area
yellow one by one. If I start off with the yellow area, you will not get what's happening here. So what
Ma'am,
am I
can
just
you
saying?
Can you repeat the calculation about consumer surplus again?
Consumer surplus এখানে এই যে what I did was এই এরিয়াটাকে ক্যালকুলেট করেছি না, this is the area below the demand curve, this is the demand curve and above the price. কোয়ান্টিটি তো আসলে bought and sold হচ্ছে 200, সো এখানে আমাদের স্টপ হয়ে যাবে আসলে এরিয়াটা। সো আমি কি করেছি, what I did was এতটুকু একটা ট্রায়াঙ্গেল আছে না, this much is one triangle আর নিচে কি একটা রেক্ট্যাঙ্গেল আছে না?
Yes, ma'am.
আচ্ছা, so what you can do is you can find the area of this triangle and the area of this rectangle and add them, তাহলে পুরোটারই এরিয়া বের হয়ে যাবে। এটা পারবা না, area of triangle and area of rectangle, half into base into height and length into breadth?
Yes, ma'am.
That's how I calculated it. That's one way. And the other way is basically you can add these two heights, এই যে দুইটা height, এটাকে add করে divided by 2 into this base. That's also another way. ঠিক আছে?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So কি হলো, কিছুটা প্রোডিউসার সারপ্লাস আমাদের যেটা আগে প্রোডিউসাররা এনজয় করতো সেটা আসলে কি হলো, ট্রান্সফার টু কনজিউমার্স, এই যে দিস মাচ। বাট ডু ইউ সি নাও, এখন বিফোর আই গো ইনটু দ্যাট, নাও উই নিড টু সি আগে টোটাল সারপ্লাস কত ছিল, 18,000, এখন কত হবে? প্রোডিউসার সারপ্লাস প্লাস কনজিউমার সারপ্লাস, which is 12,000 plus 4,000, which is 16,000. সো টোটাল সারপ্লাস কি হলো, কমে গেল না? মার্কেটে টোটাল সারপ্লাস কি লেস দেন বিফোর?
Yes,
Is everyone following? Okay. So before it was 18,000, now it's 16,000. So the total surplus has decreased by 2,000 taka. This is the amount of surplus that no one is enjoying, neither producers nor consumers. It is society welfare loss. এই যে society welfare loss সেটাকে আমরা বলি dead weight loss. This is the loss in the total surplus whenever any policy, any event causes us to trade, causes the market to trade a quantity which is below the equilibrium quantity. আমাদের equilibrium quantity কত? 300. আমরা ট্রেড করছি কতটুকু? 200. সো যখনই এটা প্রাইস কন্ট্রোলের কারণে হতে পারে, অথবা আমরা যেটা করছি না এই কোর্সে, সেটা হচ্ছে কোয়ান্টিটি কন্ট্রোল, গভর্নমেন্ট কোয়ান্টিটিও কন্ট্রোল করে দিতে পারে। সো এনি পলিসি দ্যাট ক্যান কজ a lower than equilibrium amount of quantity, amount of the good or service to be traded, that will result in deadweight loss. That is a loss in the total surplus. এই যে yellow triangle টা, can you see the yellow triangle?
Yes, ma'am.
Everyone? This is the area of the deadweight loss. এটার এরিয়া যদি এখন আমরা ক্যালকুলেট করি, সেই যে 2000 এর ডিফারেন্সটা, এটা 2000 ই হবে, এই যে half into base into height. So height is 100, 300 minus 200, this is the height. And the base is this much, which is 80 minus 40. So 40 into 100 into half, which is 4,000 into half, which is 2,000. এখানে কিন্তু হাইটটা এটা, because if you flip the triangle, it will look like this. ঠিক আছে, সবাই যে বুঝতে পারছে?
Yes,
Is
ma'am.
everyone following? Okay. So the height is the difference between the quantities, and the base is is this much. এই এতটুকু লেন্থটাকে বেস বলছি আমরা, which is 80 minus 40. So if you calculate the area of this yellow triangle, this will be 2,000. সেই 2,000 টা কি? আমাদের difference between the new total surplus and the old total surplus. এতটুকু surplus কমেছে সোসাইটিতে। এই যে yellow triangle, এটা কিন্তু কেউই পাচ্ছে না, না কনজিউমার না প্রোডিউসার। This is a loss to the society. This is a welfare loss, loss in the efficiency, because less than the equilibrium quantity is being traded. আমাদের এখানে রিজন কি? রিজন হচ্ছে because there is a price ceiling. প্রাইস ফ্লোরও যদি হয়ে থাকতো, সাপোজ at 80 টাকা, তখনও কি হতো? তখন কি হতো? কনজিউমার সারপ্লাস কমে যেত, প্রোডিউসার সারপ্লাসটা এই যে এতটুকু হয়তো বেড়ে যেত, স্টিল আমাদের এই ডেড ওয়েট লসটা হতো, বিকজ তখনও কি হচ্ছে? আমরা ইকুইলিব্রিয়ামে কম কোয়ান্টিটি ট্রেড করছি, সেটার কারণে ডেফিনেটলি একটা ডেড ওয়েট লস হবে। ইটস আ লস টু দ্য সোসাইটি। Any questions here? Do you have any questions here? Is everyone clear about this? Question থাকলে make sure to clarify it during my office hours. It's a part of your syllabus, it's a part of your assignment. Okay? Okay, last day just আমি এখানে দিয়েছি একই জিনিস but without numbers. What if আমি কোনো নাম্বার না দিয়ে বলি রাফ ডায়াগ্রাম আঁকো, তখন you can use your alphabets. এখানে just go over this once, যেটা alphabet use করে you can do the same thing. যেটা দরকার হলে কালকের ক্লাসে আমরা ডিসকাস করব। Okay, any questions here? If not, I'll take your attendance and you may leave